Welcome everyone to this 30th lecture in our complex systems and dynamics invited lecture series. So today we have Dr. Subhradeep Roy, who is in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Daytona Beach campus, USA. So briefly, Dr. Roy received his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering from the Indian Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology, Shibpur in 2010 and the IIT Kanpur in 2012. He subsequently obtained his PhD in engineering mechanics from Virginia Tech in 2017. From 2017 to 19, he was a postdoc scholar in the Physical Computing Laboratory at Virginia Tech. And from 19 to 21, he held the tenure track assistant professor position in the mechanical engineering department at California State University, Northridge. In 2021, he joined the mechanical engineering department at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Daytona Beach campus, where he is currently a tenure track assistant professor. His research interest is to study dynamical systems emerging from the natural world using an interdisciplinary approach and collaborating with researchers from various disciplines. He directs the Complex Dynamical Systems Laboratory and works on various topics, including bat swarms to vehicular traffic. It is wonderful to have you here today, Dr. Roy. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for the nice introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to present my research in front of all of you. It's a great initiative from IIT Madras to create this Center Complex Systems and Dynamics. And thank you for all the effort to the team to putting together this exciting series of talks. I know it's Friday evening at your end. Hopefully, I'll be able to make my talk exciting to keep you all engaged. The title for my today's talk is Study of Interactions in Complex Systems. With that, I think I already been introduced, so I don't have to go into too much details, but my background is in mechanical engineering. I did my bachelor's from IIST Shibpur, then master's in mechanical engineering from IIT Kanpur. During my master's, my specialization in solid mechanics and design. Then I came to US to pursue my PhD in engineering mechanics from Virginia Tech. And during that time, I was exposed to this exciting topic of complex systems, and I was fascinated by the scope of research that we could do in this field. And that's why I chose to pursue my PhD in this topic. After that, I spent 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow in a different lab at Virginia Tech. And from 2019, I was assistant professor in the mechanical engineering department at Cal State Northridge for 2 years. Finally, in fall 2021, last fall, I joined my current institute, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, as a tenure track assistant professor. So my research is primarily focused on the study of interactions in complex systems. So here are some examples of complex systems like fish schools, bat swarms, and outside natural systems. We can also have man-made complex systems like traffic and transportation networks. So I do not have to define what complex systems are to this audience, but the main feature of a complex system is that it has many interacting components. And the interaction among these units lead to an emergent behavior that we see at the group level. So there are a variety of ways we can study complex systems. And my approach to study complex systems has brought 3 objectives. The first is to study interactions in real-world systems. And some examples of real-world systems that I have studied previously or currently studying include bats, which you may have noted from my title slide. An analogous system in humans would be human opinion formation, how we interact and form opinions, and that lead to different public policy issues, where we studied same-sex marriage legislation in the United States. Another example of complex system in humans is brain dynamics. So how different regions of brain interact and how we can define the coupling between those regions. Recently, I started working in this field of traffic and transportation. Basically, when I was in Cal State Northridge, it was located in the Los Angeles area. And Los Angeles is known for terrible traffic congestions. So I started looking into how like traffic parameters at one intersection impact the other intersections and like the freeway. So it's ongoing work. And this is more of like macro understanding of how interactions happen in traffic. A micro understanding would be where we look into each driver vehicle units and how each driver vehicle respond to the actions of the surrounding vehicles. That is more micro understanding, which is also I'm interested in. While studying these real world systems, the second topic important component is apply different appropriate data analytic tools that can extract the features of this real world system. For example, if you have some time series data, how we can identify the directional relationships between those variables that can allow us to understand the nature of real world interactions. So I use tools developed by other research groups as well as develop our own tools, similar tools which can identify these directional relationships. Finally, I take inspiration from these real-world natural systems and design artificial systems using different analytical frameworks. For example, one approach we could use is called graph theoretic approach, where agents are represented as interactions among the agents are represented as network. The individuals are denoted by these vertices or nodes of the graph, and the interactions are represented by these directed edges. Alternately, we can also write these interactions in form of different adjacency matrices, for example, over here. And then we can study different consensus protocols, for example, or synchronization protocols, where agents start from different initial states. Each discrete time interval, they interact with a set of group, subset of the group who are neighbors, and negotiate and gradually reach to a state of convergence. So we can study like role of system parameters on convergence conditions. This is more of an abstract modeling. Alternatively, we can also do what is called agent-based modeling, where these are individual particles or agents, and we provide simple set of rules to all these agents. And as these agents are following the same set of rules, we see how the group level behaviors emerge, similar to what we see in nature, for example, flocking behaviors. So these are different approaches I use to study complex systems. Today, I will give you one example of my of my prior research on how interactions happen between driver vehicle units. I'll briefly present my research findings from study of interactions of bat pairs, and taking that as a motivating example, how we can use different agent-based simulation, simple modeling setup to study the emergent group level behavior. So here is the outline. I will start with the study of interactions of vehicles in traffic. I will present the data analytic tools that can be used to understand the interactions of vehicles and quantify those interactions, and also present other data analytic tools that can be deployed for this purpose. Next, I will present the interactions, the main findings of interactions of flying bat pairs. Bats are special, I will tell you why. And then I will present a simple model that we can use to study collective behavior and how we can quantify the group level behaviors that emerge, and take this model and modify it to apply bat sensing system to see if different group level behaviors emerge. So this is the plan. Let's see how it goes. Starting with the first part, study of interactions of vehicles in traffic. So when vehicles drive in traffic, they interact. Not this kind of interactions I'm talking about, but when we drive, we look ahead of us to see what the vehicles in front of us are doing. We use rear view mirror to see what vehicles behind us are doing, and we may also take information from our neighboring lanes and respond accordingly. This is what we are referring as interactions. So goal over here is how we can quantify these interactions and what data analytic tools we can use to quantify these interactions. So those are the main things I will demonstrate. If we can quantify interactions, there are a lot of things we can achieve. For example, we can refine the traffic simulation models that are currently existent. These simulation models are based on assumptions of the nature of interactions between drivers. The true driving behavior would be we can identify the true driving behavior once we quantify interactions, and thus refining these simulation models. And these simulation models then can be applied for a given city with large number of vehicles to see how traffic congestions emerge, and that can inform us about the infrastructure decisions, policymaking. Also, human driving behavior is important for different road safety interventions or designing driver assistive systems. This also, to some extent, may find applications to autonomous vehicles. So when autonomous vehicles hit the road, they need to know about human driving behavior So they need to behave in a similar way as human drivers would do to be socially acceptable. So human driving behavior is important and we need to know and has a lot of applications. So here is a research question. So we're gonna refine our research question and look at when drivers drive in a single lane and how much a driver responds to its immediate front car and respond to its immediate rear car. If we can quantify these complementary responses, we can also study whether drivers respond to same extent to their front car and the rear car. So here are the steps. Okay, before moving on to the steps, so I would like to make a comment that these research questions have been previously answered using, for example, eye tracking devices. So what eye tracking devices, what they do is they monitor the eyesight of the driver, and from that they infer the nature of interactions. But we may not respond to all the information that we take. For example, I may look outside my window right now, but I will not respond to that information if it's not something emergency. So not all information we take, we respond to that. The interaction is more about the response to the information that we take. So to do that, the question is what kind of tools we can use to quantify such interactions. And I will show you information theoretic tools can be deployed for this purpose. And I will demonstrate how to use these tools using some synthetic data generated from car following models, because in these models, we know the ground truth. So we can validate these tools as well. And then finally, I will apply this tool to the data gathered from real world experiment. So let me start with the real world experiment, because after all, we're gonna create simulation models similar to mimic the real world experimental setup. So when I started this study, it was in 2020. I couldn't conduct my own experiment because of the pandemic. So I found the data is already available from a prior study by the research conducted by Tadaki and group in 2030. So here is a video of that. So as you can see, the vehicles are traveling on a circular track, and circular track are great for two reasons. First of all, we can record or track individual vehicles for a long time. Their trajectory data can be recorded for a long time. And the tools that we're gonna use need a lot of data. They are data hungry processes. So that would provide us one huge help, because we can track and can get a large amount of data. Also, having the vehicles traveling in a single lane eliminates the presence of any lateral interaction. So vehicles, I can think of like vehicles responding to front car or the rear car. So in that experimental session, in that study, they conducted 19 different experimental sessions where the number of vehicles were varied from minimum 10 to 40. The objective of their research study was different. What they mainly found was that the emergence of these stop and go events. So when they start these experiments, there are no bottlenecks, but as one of the cars starts making more room ahead of it, that leads to reducing the gap, and gradually the stop and go events occur. So that gives rise to these phantom traffic jam formations. And this was observed that to happen when we have a number of vehicles greater than equals to 28. When we have number of vehicles less than equals to 25, there's no occurrence of those stop and go events, and those are termed as free flow. So that was the main findings. And from their experimental study, they also shared high resolution trajectory data collected from each vehicle from all of these 19 experimental sessions. And those data had high temporal and spatial resolution. So which worked great for me, because now I can use this data to answer my research question. So here is the schematic of the earlier experiment. And from this data, I defined three observables. So let's say we have a target car I, and in front of it are I plus 1, and behind it is I minus 1. From the trajectory data, I defined three observables. The first one is the distance of the car I from its immediate front car. I call it DIF. Then the distance of car I with its immediate rear car, DIR. And the distance the car I travels in next time interval delta t. So delta t here is similar to driver's response time, and from a previous study, it was found it was close to 1 second. Varies based on different traffic scenarios, but it's very close to 1 second. So we assume that this is constant for all drivers and all time. So now what we have is three time series processes. So these time series variables, DIF, DIR, DI delta T, these are functions of time. And what we end up with these three time series processes to understand like how much a driver responds to immediate front and immediate rear car, what we need to find is the directional relationships. For example, if we can find how much the time series variable DIF influences DI delta T, that would be a measure of how much driver responds to its immediate front car. Similarly, if I can measure how much the time series variable DIR influences DI delta T, that would be a measure of the directional relationship or how much a driver responds to its immediate rear car. To find these directional relationships, we can use these information theoretic tools. For example, transfer entropy or pairwise transfer entropy or causation entropy, also called conditional transfer entropy. So this is the goal. We're going to use these information theoretic tools to find these directional relationships. So let me talk about these tools briefly. So these tools are primarily based on information theoretic concept and as an extension of what is called a Shannon entropy. So Shannon entropy is defined like this. So it's for a given random variable X, it measures the average amount of uncertainty associated with the random variable X with distribution P. For example, if we have a deterministic events, then probability is 1, log of 1 is 0. So there is no information content in that variable. Whereas if we have P to be smaller values, then that would be higher amount of information content. So surprising events has a lot more information associated with it. To give you an example, I'm currently in Florida. If I come to know that or see the weather prediction that's going to be snow tomorrow, that would be a very surprising event. And that event will have a lot of information associated with it. So Shannon entropy quantifies the expected value of the amount of information contained in a random variable. And it has an unit. It could be unit of bits if you're using log base 2, or natural units, nats, if you're using log base E. We assume our time series processes to be first order Markov processes, means like the next state only depends on its current state. Now we are ready to define what is called the pairwise transfer entropy. So pairwise transfer entropy extends the concept of Shannon entropy and quantifies the information flow between two time series variables. So let's say we have two time series variables y and x, and we are interested in finding how much y influences x. So this is how the transfer entropy is defined. So we look into how much the current of y can provide any better estimate of the future occurrence of x. If y does not provide any better estimate of the future x, then this numerator and the denominator are exactly the same. So you have log of 1 goes to 0. Transfer entropy from y to x is 0, means y does not influence x. So given two time series processes, we can compute these two quantities in either direction and then compare them to find the dominant direction of coupling. Again, the unit of transfer entropy will be in nat, because we'll be implementing this in a GIDT toolkit developed by Lizier. When we have more than two interacting units, we have to be a little careful over here, because presence of third variables can lead to the occurrence of common driver effect or cascading effect. For example, let's say we have a third process Z, which is influencing both X and Y. At this scenario, if we implement the pairwise transfer entropy, which I showed you in the last slide, we'll see a false coupling between X and Y because there is a shared information because of the common driver Z. Similarly, we can have what is called a cascading effect when Y is influencing Z and Z is influencing X. Again, pairwise transfer entropy may give you spurious results because there is an indirect relationship between Y and X mediated through this intermediate variable Z. To identify this direct influence and eliminate this indirect coupling, what we have to use is called causation entropy or conditional transfer entropy. It's basically extension of the pairwise transfer entropy with additional conditioning. So to find the influence of Y on X conditioned on Z, basically looks into how much Y can better estimate X when we already know how much we can learn about the future of X using the current state of X and Z together. So that's basically conditional transfer entropy. These are the two tools I'm going to use in my study. Again, unit will be NATS implemented in GIDT. So one comment over here, when we are dealing with the real world data set, because of the limited number of samples, even when there is no true coupling, we may have a non-zero value from these measures. So to identify if those values are truly different from zero, we need to conduct difference significance test, statistical significance test. GIDT uses a surrogate test to detect whether the results are any different from zero. So let's say we have a source Y and we need to find the coupling from Y to X. So from that Y time series source data, we're gonna define number of surrogates, let's say 1,000 such surrogates, where the sequence of samples would be destroyed, they would be shuffled. And so the direct relationship between X and Y are now destroyed. Now, from those surrogate data, we're gonna conduct either conditional transfer entropy or transfer entropy and compare those values with the original value from CTE and conduct an one-tail test to identify whether the results are any different from zero. So that's the statistical significance test we're going to use here. One comment over here, these tools have been there for a long time and have been applied to different contexts. For example, to study interactions in collective behaviors with respect to bats, which I'm going to show the main findings soon. Also been applied to the study of preschools. It has also been applied to neuroscience, how different regions of brain are coupled, and to public policy issues, but only until this work where it was been applied to study the interactions among car drivers. So now that we know what tools we're gonna use, let me briefly describe the two models that we're gonna generate our data to demonstrate the use of these tools. One model we're gonna use is called IDM, Intelligent Driver Model. It's a car following model. As the name suggests, this model, this is the equation. Each car only responds to its immediate front car. I'll not go into too much details, but basically what it says is the acceleration. This is the first term in the acceleration term. It corresponds to free flow. As the vehicle increases its speed and reaches to the desired speed, the acceleration decreases. And the second term is where the interaction happens, where it's basically a braking term, where the desired gap is compared to the current gap, which is immediate front car, and accordingly, braking term is activated. So we made the parameters so that we can simulate a similar scenario that of the experiment, and we see similar behaviors that we saw in the experiment. So here is the simulated data. As we can see, like we'll see soon that some of the vehicles will come to a complete stop, leading to the stop and go events and the formation of these phantom traffic jams. When, as you can see over here, then this jam propagates in the backward direction of the traffic flow, similar to what we observe in the experiments. Second model we're going to use to generate data, it's a very classic model called optimal velocity model. It uses different set of equations to model interactions. Again, the idea is the vehicles would maintain its maximum possible speed, desired speed, and if there is enough gap. When the gap is small, it is going to choose velocity defined by this optimal velocity function. Again, from this simulation model, we see when we have number of vehicles less than 25, for example, 15, there is free flow. When we have vehicles 30, with this in the circular track, we see stop and go events start forming. So now we have these tools where we know the ground truth that each vehicle only responds to its immediate front car. And now we can generate the data and apply these tools to see what these tools let us know about the nature of interactions. So results would start with the simulated IDM data. First, I start with generating data from the IDM model, and we start with the pairwise transfer entropy. So here is the plot. So on the left, you have the jammed flow, where you see number of vehicles are 30. And on the right is the free flow, we have number of vehicles 15. The blue one here refers to transfer entropy from front to target, measure of coupling from immediate front car to the target. And the yellow one is transfer entropy from rear to target. So what it's saying is, we're going to come back to this later. So what it's saying, first of all, transfer entropy correctly picks up the fact that the dominant coupling direction is from the front to the target, because front is always greater than the corresponding rear one for all the vehicles. But it also falsely identifies rear to target coupling, because those are non-zero and also identified as statistically significant. So this is expected because now we have 3 time series variables, and we need to use conditional transfer entropy to eliminate the cascading effect that's happening over here. So we move on, we apply the conditional transfer entropy over here, and immediately we see for the jammed flow, the conditional transfer entropy identifies that there is no coupling from the rear to target, whereas it identifies that there are coupling from front to target for each of the vehicles. We do the same thing for the free flow. In the free flow, we see this rear to target are not are identified as statistically significant, but the values are very, very small and close to zero, order of magnitude smaller than the corresponding front to target. So what it says is statistical significance we need to rely on. At the same time, we need to also compare the actual values to make the determination of the existence of the coupling. So we can say conditional transfer entropy identifies that target is influenced by the front car and not influenced by the rear car. If we look at these plots, we also see there is not a lot of variation among these vehicles. So all the drivers, these values are very close to each other. This means all the drivers are behaving in a similar way. This is true because each of them are following the same set of equations, and because of that homogeneous behavior, we see there's lack of variation in this coupling values. If we compare the plots between the jammed flow and the free flow, we see slight increase in these measures from the front to target in jammed flow. This is because when stop and go events happen, each vehicle needs to respond more to the immediate front car compared to in the free flow. And that has been reflected in the higher CFT values here. Next, we apply this conditional transfer entropy, because by now we have identified it's a better measure than pairwise transfer entropy on the OVM data. So this is for the jammed flow. And again, it identifies the dominant coupling direction is from front to target. When we apply it for the free flow, interesting things we observe that there is no identification of coupling in either direction, neither the front car nor from the rear car. So we look back to the differential equation for the OVM model, and we plot the optimal velocity function over here. So this is the black curve, which is the optimal velocity function with our simulated parameters. And there are 2 regions. This is very narrow regions you can see. This is basically the vertical dashed lines correspond to the mean gaps of all the vehicles averaged over all vehicles over all the simulated time, the entire simulated time. So what it's basically saying is that in the free flow, the gaps are so large that the vehicles are driving in their desired speed and not responding any differently due to the presence of the immediate front car. So that's why there has not been any interactions, which is correctly picked up by conditional transfer entropy. Whereas in the jammed flow, this is within the zone of interactions, and that's why conditional transfer entropy picks up there is a coupling from front to target. When you do the same thing for the IDM model, IDM incorporates interactions differently than the OVM. It's in the braking term. So you see this is the black curve of the braking component, the second term in the IDM model. And we see both jammed flow and the free flow are within the zones of interaction. However, the free flow is in the region where it's less interactions, and that's where the conditional transfer entropy also picked up, identifying there's more interaction in the jammed flow compared to the free flow. So this allows us to identify how to interpret the results from these measures. At the same time, it allows us to validate and provides confidence now to move on to the applying these tools to the real world data set. So now we move on and apply this conditional transfer entropy on the 19 experimental sessions that we have the data from. And instead of showing all the results, I'm showing some sample results from 4 sessions. And those sessions came with certain IDs. The last 2 digits correspond to how many vehicles were there in that experimental session. For example, this corresponds to free flow as it has 25 vehicles. The other one had 28, 30, and 34. This three corresponds to the jammed flow. And what we observe over here, in average, drivers respond to front car, but may or may not respond to rear car. So among all the drivers in each experimental session, we see that the front to target coupling is always statistically significant. So the blue one is the front to target and yellow is the rear to target. For some drivers, we observe that rear to target is statistically significant, but some of them do not, for them, they are not. So we can conclude that drivers respond to the front car, but may or may not respond to the rear car in average. Drivers respond to immediate front car more than its immediate rear car. If we take a pair of like only one vehicle, or driver of a vehicle, we see if we compare the values, we always see the front to target is always more compared to the rear to target. That means drivers respond more to the front car compared to its immediate rear car. And also we see there are a lot of variations among these values. This is because they're in real world, human drivers not behave similarly. There is a lot of heterogeneity, as well as this could be due to the performances differences in the vehicles. So that led to the differences in the variation of these conditional transfer entropy values. We didn't have a lot of scope as the experiments were conducted with a different objective. But we know there are two different traffic scenarios. One was where there was free flow, and another where is the jammed flow. So we wanted to see whether human drivers behave any differently and their behavior is sensitive to the nature of traffic. So to do that, what I do is over here, we accumulate first isolate the free flow experiments and accumulate the conditional transfer entropy values from all the drivers and compute the mean and one standard deviation. And here is the blue one from front to target, and the yellow one is from the rear to target, and do the same thing for the jammed flow. At the first glance, we see there is not a lot of differences, seems like how drivers respond to the rear car based on the difference in traffic. However, there seems like a difference in how they respond to the immediate front car. And that seems to be sensitive to the nature of traffic. To identify whether these differences are statistically significant or not, we conduct a right-tailed Wilcoxon rank sum test, and the results show that those results are indeed different, and the front to target values are different between free and jammed flow, whereas rear to target values are not any different. So from here, what we can conclude is that drivers respond to their immediate front car more during jam traffic because they need to respond as they have to go through the stop and go events compared to in free traffic when they can drive in their desired speed, whereas they may or may not they may not respond any differently to the rear car, and that's not sensitive to the free or the jammed flow. We couldn't do a lot of analysis because we are restricted by the scope of the experimental study within which it was conducted earlier. So currently I'm in my lab, we are setting up these virtual reality-based driving simulators. And these are also multi-driver facility, means we can drive together in a shared environment and we can respond to each other's actions. And virtual reality will provide some immersive experience so we can capture real-world human driving behavior. And within this in this experimental setup, we can create different vehicle sizes. We can consider different number of lanes, different traffic and driving conditions. We can change like weather condition. We can create scenarios of rain, snow, as well as we can change the day of the time when the driving is happening. So without taking into account of the driver's safety. And from this setup, we also be able to record data of drivers' actions. We'll be able to collect time series data of the individual driver's action, for example, their rotation of the wheels, the pressure in their gas pedals, and the brakes. Those would be also available, as well as the vehicle level data. So we can answer both vehicle level interaction and driver level interactions. So what our final goal is to see how we can develop these traffic simulation models directly from data, means data-driven model discovery. As you saw, these car following models, those are based on assumptions. There are many such traffic simulation models. Each assumption led to a different model. And these models are difficult to validate because we don't have a lot of data, and that's why we need data. At the same time, the question is if we can discover the data directly from, discover the model directly from data. And that's why we are using an approach which was developed by Brunton in the Cindy framework, where we can find the functional relationship between the variables. So transfer entropy tells you whether to include the variables associated with the rear car or not, and gives you an idea of how the model structure would be, gives you an interaction network. And once we know the model structure, the question is how to derive the functional relationships, and for which we are currently using Cindy. We are testing this with OVM data. With OVM data, it has been successful. Now we are trying with the IDM data. So it's currently ongoing. Maybe I can share the result next time for this. So in this part, I mentioned about the information theoretic tools, but there are other tools that are also existent. I want to comment on those. So basically what we are trying to see is when we have time series processes, how they are related. If we have two time series processes, they can be related by Y influencing X, X influencing Y, or third possibility is a bidirectional influence. The tools that we use are called causal discovery tools, and there are other such tools like convergent cross mapping, which I have used in my study with bats. And during my postdoctoral studies, I was also contributing in this topic and developed our own tools, and currently also applying into different collective behavior studies. That idea was based on what is called dynamical symmetry. I just wanted to let you know there are other tools that are existent, which can be also used for this same purpose. Now let me quickly share the results with the my prior experiment with flying bats. So why bats? Bats are social. They're interesting species. They execute collective behavior, but unique to bats is that they use echolocation or active sensing. We humans use passive sensing, means we need to rely on the ambient light to learn about our environment. However, for bats, they can create their own ultrasonic sound. The sound gets reflected from the obstacles. They listen to that, and that's how they can identify the neighbors, interact, and also identify food. An important component of bats is that, like of active sensing, is that that promotes information sharing. There has been evidences in biological studies where it shows that when bats fly together, oftentimes one bat just stays silent and eavesdrop and listen to its peers' echolocation, and that's how it can learn about its surroundings. So it promotes information sharing and ways, energy efficient ways to communicate. So how bats effectively communicate is an interest not only to biological community, but also to engineers, so that we can learn from them and design energy efficient drone swarms. So to understand how bats effectively use this echolocation, we refine our research question and focus on a pair of bats. So here, the research question is, when two bats fly together, do they interact with each other or not? In case they do, what is the directionality? Is the front bat influences the rear bat, or the rear bat influences the front bat? And here we hypothesize that the interaction manifests in their turning behavior. Means if you turn, whether I turn or not. To answer this research question, our research group, this is from my PhD studies, went to China. This is our experimental setup over here, a cave in China, where the bats are flying out of this cave. And here are the steps. We are going to collect data from wild bats. And we had 6 different cameras set up to record these bats flying out of the cave. From these 6 different camera views, which provide you the 2D trajectory, what we need to do is called tracking to reproject and identify the 3D path coordinates of each of the bats. So we tracked a total of 30 pairs of bats, based on which we conducted our analysis. Once we had the 3D coordinates, we identified the 1D curvature-based time series, on which we conducted our analysis using transfer entropy and convergent cross mapping. So here we have only 2 bats, so we are okay to use pairwise transfer entropy. So I'm not going to go into too much details, but I'm going to share the main findings. We also had different experimental setup where we provided some obstacles and absence of obstacles. Interesting thing happened in absence of obstacles, where we saw both this transfer entropy and CCM unanimously identified that there is an evidence of rear to front coupling. Now, this rear to front coupling is counterintuitive to us, because we human cannot process information from our rear end, because that's our blind spot. But for the bats, they are using a different way of communicating. They're using an auditory sensing, you can think of an directional acoustic beam that has been generated by a rear bat and that propagates forward in space, and the front bat, when it resides within its acoustic beam, it can learn about the rear bat. So because of this acoustic mode of communication that allows bat to have this rear to front coupling. So next, we wanted to see how this mode of communication impact their group level, may have impact on their group level behaviors doing in kind of a simulation environment. So to do that, we wanted to use a very simple model, and I'm going to introduce a very simple model next, which is called a Vic-Sheck model. So Vic-Sheck model has been its seminal work from 1995, and it's been named after the first author of this work. It's a very simple model, and it's popular because of its minimal nature, and it can replicate the flocking behavior that we see in nature. The idea over here is an agent-based model. So the rules are provided to each agent, and agents can move in this simulation arena. So it's a discrete time protocol. So each agent updates in discrete time, and there are some assumptions. It's very idealized model and very simple as well. The first assumption is that the agents have constant speed. So all agents have constant speed for all time, which is V naught. And the second assumption is that they have this called periodic boundary condition. Means if an agent lives through one side of this simulation arena, it re-enters from the opposite edge. This is as if they're moving on a surface of a torus. So that's what the periodic boundary condition is, and it's also eliminating the effect of any boundaries. Next, the notations we're going to use for an agent J, we're going to use the position X at time T. It's going to be a two-dimensional vector because we are simulating in a 2D environment. And unit velocity of an agent J is denoted by Vj. It's also a two-dimensional vector. So here is how the position is updated. The position of agent J at time T plus 1, the next time step, depends on two quantities, the current position and then V times delta T. So basically forward Euler. And here you have the constant speed V naught, then the unit velocity vector Vj, which is has norm 1, and we set delta T equals to 1. So you have Vj, which we can also write in terms of the heading direction theta. So let's say we know the heading direction of an agent J theta. I can write it as cosine theta along I is the direction, the unit vector, and then sine theta along J. So that would be the direction, and that's what will be updated. That's when the interactions happen. So velocity is update is where the interactions occur, and to update its heading direction, each agent identifies its neighbors. So how neighbors are defined? Let's say we have an agent J, the particle in red, and we define its sensing region as this circular region, drawing a circle of radius r surrounding it. So this is a sensing region within which it can sense the presence of other particles. So it can sense these green particles, and it cannot sense the gray particles outside its sensing region. So once the neighbors are defined for each agent at each time step, and from its neighbor state, it updates its heading direction. So here is how the update happens. The first term over here highlighted, it's the average heading direction. So it learns from its neighbors what is their current heading, and in its head, it computes the average heading, which is the result, computing the resultant vector. And this is the angle that the resultant vector makes with an error term. This error term represents noise or its own choice. So how much it wants to deviate from this average direction. So we represent it as a random variable with uniform distribution from minus eta over 2 to eta over 2. Eta is the noise intensity. So a larger amount of noise means higher value of eta, and that's what the tuning parameter would be. We're going to test it to see whether the flocking behavior is sensitive to that. So once we know theta, we can update the velocity using this relation. So as you can tell, it's a very simplified model, and that's why we're going to use it to test the role of different sensing scheme on the emergent group level behaviors. Let me quickly show you some videos. I've taken this video from YouTube just to give you an idea of how this Vic-Sheck model works. So when we have small amount of noise, we see this flocking behaviors form. As we change or increase the noise intensity, we see the random walk emerges. You will see as the eta gets larger, this ordered behavior in the system is destroyed, and we see a transition to a disordered behavior, leading to this random walk now. So before we move on, let me also introduce the order parameters that we're going to use to measure the group level behaviors. The group level behaviors can be measured in terms of polarization, which is the normalized linear momentum. It's for all the agents, it computes the average heading and then compute the norm. So basically adding vectorially and compute the norm. When all the particles have exactly the same heading, this value would be n. So scale it by 1 over n, so we have a value of polarization 1. So polarization can be between value 0 and 1. 1 means perfect alignment, 0 means random walk. The other order parameter that we're going to use to measure the group level behavior is cohesion, which is defined here. Cohesion is basically how far the particles are distributed. When we have the particles accumulating at the center of mass, Ri, which is a measure of the relative position of the individual particles from the center of mass, Ri would be 0, c to the power 0 is 1. So cohesion would be 1 when all the particles accumulate at the center of mass. The further they spread out, cohesion would go closer to value 0. So cohesion and polarization can both have values between 0 and 1. Polarization 1, perfect alignment. Cohesion 1 means closely packed at the center of mass. So here are some demonstration. This would be an instance with high polarization, high cohesion. This would be an instance where high polarization because all the agents are moving in common heading direction, but they are more spread out. This would be an instance where we have small polarization values, but large cohesion because they're forming this closely packed cluster. And we can also have low polarization, low cohesion, when, for example, over here. So next, we're gonna take this model, it's a very simplified model, and we're gonna modify this model to implement BATS-inspired sensing. Basically, we're gonna conduct a contrastive simulation, one with visual mode of sensing, another with the auditory mode of sensing. So how are we gonna implement this sensing? So first of all, let me explain the visual sensing. So we provide each agent a field of vision within which it can sense the presence of other particles. So for example, if you look at the orange particle over here, the yellow region represents its field of vision, where it can sense the presence of the blue particle. So the blue particle is its neighbor, and the gray particles are not its neighbors because it cannot take information from them. In a contrasting case, we define an auditory sensing. In the auditory sensing, particles are no more using visual mode of sensing. Instead, they are making sound. The directionality of these sound beams are shown by these the blue regions, these directional acoustic beams. And now, if let's say this orange particle, if it resides within this acoustic coverage, it can listen from its neighbors. So now here the orange particle can hear from these two blue particles, which will be its neighbors, but the gray particle is not its neighbor. So as you can tell, these two different sensing modality leads to basically is in the different in the sense how the neighbors would be determined. So here neighbor determination happens based on its visual sensing mode. So agents occupying the field of vision, and in the auditory mode, the neighbors would be the agents whose beams are occupied. Now we conduct two contrasting simulation. We keep exactly the same all other simulation parameters, for example, the sensing regions and everything. And one of them, I think the left one, is the pure auditory. We immediately see a very different group level behavior emerges when we compare pure audition with respect to the pure visual mode. In the pure auditory mode, we see the entire group forms one single cluster, and they have a common heading direction, but they are more spread out. Whereas in the visual mode, we see they form closely packed clusters. The individuals within the clusters have common heading directions, but the individual cluster may go in different directions. Thus, we should expect low polarization. So in the pure audition, we have high polarization because of the high common group alignment, but low cohesion because they're more spread out. In the visual mode, we see low polarization because of this formation of clusters, which increases cohesion, but this cluster is moving in random directions. I didn't show the other study here where we extended this work and we use sensory fusion. So where individuals are simultaneously using this both auditory and the visual mode, basically combining these sensory neighbors. So each agent ascribed different sensing weight to audition and vision, and we study the role of that weight to these different group level behaviors. The main finding was when auditory modes are introduced in the system, even in a small sensing weight that leads the group behavior, we see immediately these high polarizations emerge. And the group benefits the maximum when we have equal weights ascribed to both audition and visual mode. So I think I should stop to leave some time to questions. To summarize, what I showed you is how I study complex systems, basically interactions in real world systems, with an example of vehicular traffic. And I mentioned some of the tools that can be used to learn the features of these real world interactions. And taking an example of a real world system of bats, how we can, that inspires us to do some modeling where we can see how sensing modalities lead to very different group level behaviors. With that, I would like to thank you everyone for listening. I hope I'm within time, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. That was an excellent talk and a very fascinating talk, in fact, especially with the bats that you mentioned. Okay, the floor is now open for questions. If anyone has any questions, kindly raise your hands and then go ahead. Okay, while we wait for others to ask questions, I'll just ask, see, in nature, we do see that when birds are flying together or even bats are flying together, flocking together, there is a sense of they are more aligned. There's a lot of cohesion and polarization. It's the other thing doesn't happen. So here you took a random variable, right? When you were in that equations. So is there a way by which we can show that it is more energy efficient, or it is not energy efficient, more efficient in terms of, or on other words, if E of t is very different from the average polarized direction, then there is some sort of a penalty for that particular agent.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if it's been done before, but it's basically like how uh, how the variability in like E, the error term, leads to uh, the how that impacts the group level behaviors. I don't know if such a thing has been done, but it's definitely an interesting question. Basically, like looking into the optimization problem of the error term.
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure. It's a very simple model, so that's why I'm not sure how much it actually captures the real world interactions. The power of this tool is in its simplicity, but at the same time, we do not have the for example, the collision avoidance. So there are other models which exist, which has more realistic components, but the simplicity of these models, and there are always a scope to like make these models improved. So error term could be also tested in this context, but I've never done that before. Good
The
question.
reason why I'm asking is in terms of if you want to make a control algorithm. For example, you want to design the flight of a swarm of MAVs, for example, robotic insects or something. So, so how would you, I mean, is there a way by which we can control this? Engineered a particular direction, rather. That's what I'm trying to think.
Right. I think like there this like what I mentioned previously was this consensus protocol that looks into this kind of techniques, And what we could look into is the disagreement among these agents. So it's basically a measure of the disagreement among these agents and how to minimize the disagreement, how to set the parameters that we can minimize the disagreement that can lead to this fastest convergence condition. So it has to be projected in terms of the consensus protocols, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's a food for thought. I don't have ready answer for that.
Another question that I have with respect to your vehicular jam model, vehicular
Mm-hmm.
model. See, one of the things that we see, for especially with respect to traffic in India, is that it seems very chaotic, very, very chaotic.
Right. Uh-huh.
But yet there are not as many collisions that you would expect. I mean, we do have a large number of accidents, but despite the collision, there seems to be some sort of a learning mechanism between each individual, where not only each individual is trying to ensure that his or her car does not get hit with another vehicle, but also I mean, it's a two-way thing, that I will not hit that person, and that person also thinking is that I will not hit this, despite having a very, very heterogeneous movement behavior. So there seems to be some sort of additional learning, or I wouldn't say learning mechanism, maybe a some sort of a self-avoidance or self-preservation mechanism that is playing there. Do you think that is something that is happening, or it's just a consequence of whatever, it's a pure action like that, whatever you have?
Yeah, driving in traffic is a very complex behavior. There's so many things that play into and how we make decisions. There's so many factors that drive our decision making. And in US, you were right, it's more of like lane-based behavior. In India, it would be a mixed traffic where like we don't necessarily see this lane-based behavior. And the factor is more driven by do not hit other cars. Here, on the other hand, we also see like that people tend to maintain the speed because there are, of course, less number of traffic, less number of vehicles over here compared to what we have in India. There is a possibility to maintain that maximum desired speed. So depending upon the context, yes, the behaviors are driven by different factors based on two different cultural and situational scenarios over here. And driving behavior here, what would be very different from the driving behavior that we see in India. So I agree that would be mostly don't hit me and I don't want to hit you. That would be the driving factor. So how to accumulate in that equations? It's a good question. So that again could be done if the approach that I'm taking next using this data-driven approach. So directly learn about interaction, nature of interaction. So in that case, I would see a bidirectional influence emerging in those as we learn from that data.
So using that Cindy algorithms that you are talking about.
Using
Cindy.
Yes, the Cindy approach that I was talking about, like how to discover the functional relationship between variables directly from data.
So you have not really, as of now, compared with whatever you have done with some of the established models on, traffic flow or something like that. You have not yet done that.
Yeah, we are currently doing what we are using Cindy for is to generate some synthetic data from the OVM and the IDM model. And now we implement transfer entropy. So we know that we do not need to include the variables associated with the rear car. So it's validated the transfer entropy approach. Next, the question is what variables need to be included in the traffic models and what the functional relationships would be. What Cindy does is it uses the regression technique to identify the functional relationships and recreate the differential equations. And so far we tested Cindy with OVM. It has been successful, but now we are trying with IDM, which has more complex equation. So it's ongoing. So we have not been able to reach that far where I can present.
Some of my colleagues here in IIT Madras and who are part of this complex systems and dynamics, they have also worked in crowd, how a human crowd is moves. For example, in so but they have used a different approach where they have primarily used phase transitions and fluid mechanics and that. So have you ever thought that, because I see some commonalities with what you're doing in terms of the problem and what my colleagues are doing, but the approaches are quite different. So have you ever thought of, uh, just checking between what are the commonalities between the predictions using these two different approaches?
Yeah, it's like the phase transitions an important component here. So when the big check model that shows a phase transition from ordered to disordered behavior when we have the noise, change the noise intensity or we change the number of individuals. So that's interest to the physicists as well. So we have been looking at, for example, in the context of phase transition, what are the metrics we could use? So susceptibility, for example, is one measure that has been used previously, and it has been found that it's a better metric exists which uses information theoretic approach, for example, mutual information to identify the transition of phase, exactly identify the phase transition. So we are currently exploring that as well. But I have not used any fluid mechanics because it depends on like what students' interests are as well. Like if we find students who are interested in fluid mechanics, then definitely we can also think of including that.
But it's very interesting with whatever you're doing. It's I mean, fascinating.
Thank you so much.
So are there any other questions? Because I seem to be hogging all the questions from the audience. Okay, I think we don't have too many questions anymore. So with that, we will thank Professor Roy once again for a wonderful talk and a fascinating one. And what was very interesting to see that your lab name is also complex dynamical systems. So I hope we have an opportunity to physically invite you here and host you here, and sometime, and we can see if there is some commonalities and common projects in which we can start working together as a group.
That would be excellent. I would like to take this opportunity to get feedback. If you have any questions or have any comments, you can reach out to me. I have in my the last slide, I have my information and also there in the I think in the poster. So please reach out to me if you have any questions, and I would look forward to any opportunity to collaborate. It's always a pleasure. IIT Madras is one of the best university in India, and having an opportunity to present my work in front of all of you, it's a real pleasure. And thank you for this.
Okay, there was someone wrote something. Oh, Pardeep Kumar, you have any question? Thanks for a good session and take an idea for. I mean, do you have a question? Maybe this microphone is
Thank
not
you,
working.
Pardeep.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir.
Yes.
Can I? Oh, okay, sir. Okay. I have no question, but thank for a good session, and
Yeah.
I
Okay.
take some idea from this lecture also in my work.
Great. Yeah, let me know, like if we could talk
Actually, I
and
am working in the mathematical modeling of cancer, sir.
mathematical modeling of what?
Brain tumor, sir.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of biomedical applications. Very
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
talk. I
And
would love
thank
to
you, sir.
know more.
Thanks one again.
Sure. Thank you so much for your comment.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, thank you, Dr. Roy, once again. And it was a pleasure to have you. And with that, we'll close this session.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and happy Diwali. Take care.
Yeah, same to you. Bye.